My name is Amara Sage, and at 37, my life often felt like a recipe meticulously crafted by someone else, a complex dish in which I was a minor, almost imperceptible ingredient. The primary flavor, the star of the show, was always someone else. By day, I navigated the sterile corridors of Consolidated Paper Goods, Inc. as a marketing coordinator. The job was a bland, beige cubicle in the grand office building of life, stable, soul-crushingly boring, and precisely what my parents, David and Clara Sage, lauded as sensible. It paid the bills, kept a roof over my head in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the city's slightly less fashionable West End, and allowed me to contribute to my meager savings account. But the real me, the person who simmered beneath the surface of spreadsheets and marketing jargon, only came alive in the fragrant, steamy chaos of my small, slightly cluttered kitchen. This was my sanctuary, my laboratory, my heart. Gesturing to the rows of gleaming jars, their contents jewel-toned and promising, I'd whisper to myself, "This, sweet traditions, my tiny dream bubbling away on the back burner of my life." Each jar, labeled "Sweet Traditions by Amara" in elegant handwritten script, was a testament to a passion they couldn't or wouldn't see. Strawberry and balsamic fig and cardamom, spiced peach and bourbon, these were not just preserves. They were stories, bottled emotions, fragments of a culinary voice I was desperate to amplify. The small gas hob, usually fighting a losing battle against the city chill, would be blazing copper pots bubbling with fruit and sugar, the air thick with the scent of spices and possibilities. It was a stark contrast to the scent of recycled air and lukewarm coffee that defined my weekdays. My family, the Sages, were ostensibly in the business of sweetness, too, though their brand was far more established, far more lauded. They ran Sage and Sons Patisserie, a name that even now leaves a bitter ash taste on my tongue. Or rather, my golden boy younger brother Julian supposedly ran it. He was the prodigy, the heir apparent, the one whose every half-baked idea was met with parental oohs and ahs. I was Amara, the practical one, the responsible daughter, the one who got the good, steady job with benefits and a pension plan while Julian was encouraged to pursue his culinary vision, a vision that seemed to involve more style than substance, more hype than actual baking prowess. Memories from my younger years flicker like faulty fluorescent lights, each one a small, sharp sting of dismissal. I see myself barely a teenager proudly presenting a blue ribbon from the Allerton County Fair baking contest for my lemon lavender scones. My parents, David and Clara, barely glanced up from their hushed, intense discussion about Julian's latest brilliant idea for the family bakery, something involving truffle oil and croissants, if I recall correctly, a venture that predictably and expensively flopped. "That's nice, dear," Mom had murmured, her eyes already drifting back to Dad's anxious face. Dad just grunted a sound I learned early on meant that's irrelevant to the Grand Sage family narrative. Julian, meanwhile, a cherubic 10-year-old at the time, was being praised for successfully, if messily, frosting a cupcake, a single cupcake. The bakery was our family's pride, a local institution in the more affluent borough of Oak Haven. Or so I was told repeatedly at every family gathering, every holiday, every whispered conversation I wasn't meant to overhear, but always did. My parents poured everything into it, their money, their time, their hopes, and most significantly, all their available praise and attention into Julian. My own culinary dreams, whispered tentatively during rare moments of parental availability, were met with benign neglect. "A nice hobby, dear," Mom would say, patting my hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Focus on your career. Baking is so uncertain." The unspoken coda was always unlike Julian's assured success. The irony was, I loved the idea of Sage and Sons. I grew up amidst the scent of yeast and melting chocolate. I understood the alchemy of flour and sugar, but I was never invited to be a true part of it, not in any meaningful way. My suggestions for new, more contemporary preserved flavors to accompany their pastries were dismissed as too niche, or not what our customers expect. My offers to help with quality control, an area where I privately thought they desperately needed assistance, were waved away. "Julian has it covered, Amara. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." Then about 2 years ago, a lifeline appeared shimmering like a mirage in my very dry desert. My Grandma Eleanor. Eleanor Vance. My mother's mother, a woman as sharp as a shard of ice, impeccably dressed in Chanel and old secrets, and the only member of the family who ever truly saw the fire in my belly for this craft, started sending me $1,500 a month. The deposit would appear in my bank account like clockwork, labeled Eleanor Vance Investment. I remember the conversation vividly. We were in her sun-drenched drawing room in her stately Victorian house in the historic part of town, sipping Earl Grey from delicate porcelain cups that were older than my parents' marriage. "An investment, Amara?" She'd said, her gaze direct, missing nothing. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her posture regal even in a comfortable armchair. "For sweet traditions. To help you buy quality ingredients, perhaps some better equipment. I've tasted your fig and cardamom preserve, dear. It's exceptional. Far better than that sugary strawberry jam Julian insists on churning out at the bakery." She paused, a glint in her usually serene blue eyes. "I expect you to make this flourish, Amara. Perhaps even supply Sage and Sons one day. Show them what real quality tastes like." I was floored, tears pricking my eyes. The validation, more than the money, felt like a balm on years of quiet hurt. But beneath the profound gratitude, a seed of guilt took root. My corporate job at Consolidated Paper Goods drained me, leaving little energy for the Herculean effort required to build a business from scratch, even a small one. Sweet Traditions was growing, yes, but at a snail's pace. Orders trickled in from local farmers markets, a few online sales, a small deli on the other side of town. I meticulously cataloged every penny of Grandma's investment, using it for the best organic fruit, from local farms, Madagascan vanilla beans, high-quality pectin. I even bought a slightly larger copper pot, but a commercial-grade mixer, a dedicated kitchen space. Those felt like distant dreams, planets away. I felt like I was letting Grandma down, not using her generous investment wisely or quickly enough. The weight of her expectation, her belief in me, was both a comfort and a quiet torment. Little did I know that $1,500 was a meticulously crafted instrument, a probe. It wasn't just a lifeline, it was a ticking time bomb, and Grandma Eleanor, with her knowing eyes and serene smile, had just lit the fuse. The annual Vance family dinner. My mother's side of the family presided over by the formidable Eleanor. It was an institution, an obligation, a performance. This year it was held at Grandma Eleanor's elegant home, a sprawling heritage property with manicured gardens and rooms filled with antiques that whispered stories of generations past. Everything was about to change. The polite veneer of Sage family success was about to crack, splinter, and then spectacularly shatter. And I, Amara Sage, the minor ingredient, was about to discover I was the catalyst. The dining room at Grandma Eleanor's was a study in old-world opulence. A mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen stretched long enough to accommodate the extended Vance clan, though tonight it was a more intimate gathering. Just Grandma, my parents, Julian, and myself. Crystal glasses shimmered under the soft glow of a massive chandelier, casting dancing diamonds of light across heavy silverware and pristine linen napkins. The air was perfumed with the scent of roast lamb rosemary and the faintest hint of lemon polish. Julian, as usual, was holding court. At 29, he still possessed a boyish charm that many found endearing, though I'd long since seen through it to the callow core beneath. He was dressed in an ostentatiously expensive, slightly too tight silk shirt, gesturing expansively with a breadstick as he regaled us with tales of his latest triumphs at Sage and Sons Patisserie. "And the new Earl Grey eclairs, an absolute sensation. We can barely keep them on the shelves," he proclaimed, his voice booming with unearned confidence. I exchanged a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance with Grandma Eleanor. I'd walked past Sage & Sons just last week. The display case had looked decidedly uninspired, the eclairs suspiciously similar to the ones they'd been trying to push unsuccessfully 6 months prior under a different fancy name. My father, David, puffed his chest out, beaming like Julian had just single-handedly solved world hunger. That's my boy, a true visionary, always innovating. And Dad, a man whose own ambitions had long ago curdled into a kind of desperate, vicarious living through his son, lapped up Julian's fabrications with an almost pathetic eagerness. My mother, Clara, chimed in, her voice a little too bright, a little too strained around the edges. "Oh, Julian, we're so proud. The calls we get. The compliments, Amara isn't your brother. Wonderful." She turned to me, her smile wide, insistent, a silent plea for me to play my part in this well-rehearsed family play. I forced a smile, a tight, uncomfortable stretch of my lips. Amazing Julian, truly. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I poked at the perfectly roasted asparagus on my plate, my appetite dwindling with every boastful pronouncement from my brother and every sycophantic echo from my parents. I felt the familiar weight of invisibility settle over me, a heavy cloak I'd worn for so many years. Grandma Eleanor at the head of the table watched everyone with a keen, unreadable expression. She was a master of observation, her silence often more potent than any words. She took a delicate sip of her vintage Bordeaux, her eyes sharp and assessing, moving from Julian's animated face to my parents' adoring gazes, and finally to me. The room, which had been buzzing with Julian's monologue, seemed to hold its breath. Then she turned her full attention to me. The shift was subtle, but the energy in the room pivoted instantly. Every fork midway to a mouth seemed to freeze. Even Julian, mid-gesticulation, paused. "Amara, dear." Grandma began, her voice calm, clear, cutting through the self-congratulatory fog. "That $1,500 I send you every month for your Sweet Traditions Preserve business. Is it proving enough to cover your ingredient costs and perhaps look into that commercial-grade mixer you mentioned to me a while ago? The one you said would significantly increase your production capacity." The air crackled. The silence was no longer anticipatory. It was thick, heavy, suffocating. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could feel the blood rush to my face. My parents froze their smiles, stiffening, then dissolving like sugar in rain. Julian looked from Grandma to me, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion, for once not the center of attention. "Oh, Grandma," I stammered, caught completely off guard. My mind raced. Why was she asking this now here in front of everyone? The shame I often felt about my slow progress with Sweet Traditions washed over me anew. It's a huge help, a lifesaver, really. Things are progressing. I winced internally at my own vagueness. I hadn't done enough, hadn't achieved enough with her generous support. The guilt was a familiar companion. Before I could elaborate or perhaps stumble further, my father jumped in, his voice a shade too loud, too quick. "Mother Amara's very grateful. Of course it's enough. More than enough. She's just being modest. Her little hobby is doing just fine, aren't you, Amara?" He shot me a look that was part command, part desperate appeal. "Yes, just fine." Clara echoed, her hand fluttering nervously to her pearls. She reached for the wine bottle with a slightly trembling hand. "More wine, anyone? This roast is simply divine, isn't it?" Her attempt to divert the conversation was as subtle as a foghorn. Grandma Eleanor didn't acknowledge the offer of wine. Instead, she gave David and Clara a long, pointed look. It was a look that could strip paint. In that moment, watching her, I saw a flicker of something deeply knowing, almost conspiratorial in her eyes, as they met mine for a brief second. It wasn't accusatory towards me. It was something else entirely, something I couldn't yet decipher. The rest of the dinner was an exercise in excruciating awkwardness, Julian sensing the shift in mood, and no longer the star sulked quietly. My parents made forced, stilted conversation about the weather, local politics, anything but business. Their earlier ebullience replaced by a palpable tension. I picked at my food, replaying Grandma's question and my parents' bizarrely panicked reaction over and over in my mind. A knot cold and hard began to tighten in my stomach. Why were they so eager to shut down the conversation, so desperate to assure Grandma that I was fine and needed nothing more? Grandma's question on the surface had been innocent enough, a simple inquiry from a supportive benefactor. Or was it? The unease lingered, a bitter aftertaste to an otherwise exquisite meal. The facade of happy family success had developed a hairline crack, and I had a sinking feeling that something was about to crawl out. The following day, at Consolidated Paper Goods, Inc., was a blur of muted grays and fluorescent hums. I stared at spreadsheets detailing quarterly sales projections for industrial-grade paper towels, but the numbers swam before my eyes, morphing into Grandma Eleanor's piercing gaze, my father's strained face, my mother's fluttering hands. The knot in my stomach hadn't dissolved overnight. If anything, it had tightened, coiling with a nascent suspicion I couldn't yet articulate. My focus was shot. How could the simple mention of $1,500, a sum that, while significant to me, was hardly astronomical in the grand scheme of family finances, cause such a peculiar ripple of panic? My desk phone jangled, startling me out of my reverie. The caller ID displayed Eleanor Vance. My breath hitched. "Amara, dear." Her voice came through the receiver, calm, firm, yet with an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. "Could you come for tea this afternoon? Say around 4? Just us." It wasn't phrased as a question, not really. It was a summons cloaked in polite invitation. "Of course, Grandma," I replied, my own voice sounding distant to my ears. "I'll leave work a little early." "Excellent. I'll expect you." The line clicked dead. Her tone, devoid of its usual leisurely warmth, confirmed my disquiet. This wasn't a casual invitation for biscuits and reminiscence. This was something else. Something serious. A few hours later, I found myself back in Grandma Eleanor's sun-drenched drawing room, the scent of Earl Grey and old money clinging to the air. The porcelain teacups were out, but the atmosphere was far from serene. Grandma wasn't in her usual armchair. She was seated at her imposing antique mahogany desk, a formidable piece of furniture that always made me feel like a supplicant before a queen. Spread before her were not tea cakes, but a collection of documents, bank statements, crisp copies of invoices stamped with the familiar Sage and Sons Patisserie logo, and several official-looking letters with stern letterheads from various financial institutions and suppliers. She gestured for me to sit in the plush velvet chair opposite the desk. "Tea, Amara?" she asked, her voice neutral. "Yes, please, Grandma." As she poured, her movements precise and economical, she began. "Amara, I asked that question last night for a reason, a very specific reason." She handed me my cup, her eyes meeting mine unwavering. "I needed to see their faces, your parents' faces, Julian's too, for that matter." I took a sip of tea, the familiar bergamot flavor doing little to soothe the growing chill in my veins. Their reaction was strange. I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Strange?" Grandma repeated, a dry, humorless smile touching her lips. "Yes, one could call it that. The $1,500 I've been sending you wasn't just for your sweet traditions, my dear, though that was its stated and indeed my primary purpose for you. It was also a test, a carefully calibrated test for your parents. And I'm afraid, Amara, they have failed. Spectacularly." My blood, which had been cool, turned to ice. My hand trembled slightly as I placed the teacup back on its saucer, the delicate china rattling a little too loudly in the quiet room. "I don't understand, Grandma." She sighed, a sound more of weary resignation than surprise. "Sage and Sons Patisserie," she said, her voice dropping a little, "is drowning in debt. It has been for some time. Julian, bless his well-meaning but utterly incompetent heart, knows more about the latest video game releases and designer sneakers than he does about profit margins or inventory management. Your father, blinded by some misguided paternal pride or perhaps an unwillingness to admit his own past business failings, enables his every incompetence. And your mother, Well, your mother wrings her hands, bakes the occasional batch of genuinely good shortbread, and hopes for a miracle. The words hit me like a physical blow. Drowning in debt, but they always seemed so successful. The glowing reviews they selectively shared at family gatherings, the framed Best Bakery in Oak Haven 2019 plaque, still proudly displayed by the cash register, Julian's constant talk of expansion and new expensive equipment. But the awards, the new espresso machine they bought last year, Julian's talk of franchising, I stammered, clinging to the facade they had so carefully constructed. Grandma Eleanor gave a sad, knowing smile. Appearances, my dear Amara. They are masters of illusion, your parents. Julian is merely their most prized puppet. The award is 3 years out of date. The espresso machine was bought on a high-interest lease they are now struggling to pay. Franchise talk is just that. Talk designed to impress gullible investors they haven't yet managed to find. She tapped a neatly stacked pile of invoices with a perfectly manicured fingernail. For the past 18 months, Amara, since shortly after I began my investment in Sweet Traditions, a significant portion of that $1 and $500 I sent for your business has been reallocated by your parents, diverted to prop up the failing bakery to pay overdue supplier bills to cover Julian's more egregious financial blunders. The room tilted, siphoned. The word echoed in the sudden roaring silence in my head. They hadn't just dismissed my dreams, hadn't just neglected my passion. They had actively, deceitfully stolen from it. Stolen from me, stolen from her stated intention. A wave of nausea, potent and bitter, rose in my throat. My carefully hoarded funds, the symbol of Grandma's belief in me, the very seeds of my future, used to patch the holes in their sinking, lie-ridden ship. My mind, suddenly sharp and cold, began to race, replaying small, unsettling incidents from the past year and a half. Incidents I had dismissed as thoughtlessness, as minor irritations, as typical family quirks. Her P.O. box, my mother, Clara, had helpfully offered to manage my Sweet Traditions P.O. box. "Oh, it's no trouble at all, dear," she'd chirped. "I go to the post office for the bakery mail every day anyway. It'll save you the trip, give you more time for your recipes." I'd been grateful at the time, another tedious task off my plate. Now the help reeked of something sinister. Control, access. My father, David, casually asking to borrow a few $100s from my preserve earnings last Christmas. "Just a temporary float, Amara," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder with forced bonhomie. "The bakery has a huge catering order for the mayor's New Year's Eve gala payment up front. We'll be flush then. Just need to cover some unexpected ingredient costs." The gala had come and gone. The bakery, I now suspected, never had the order. The money was never repaid, absorbed into the black hole of their debts. My timid inquiries met with vague promises and swift changes of subject. Julian. Oh, Julian. Accidentally using an entire vial of my expensive imported bourbon vanilla beans, the ones I'd saved for 3 months to afford for a special batch of spiced pear and vanilla preserve, for one of his disastrous experimental cronut batches, which ended up tasting, by his own admission, a bit like old socks. He'd laughed it off. "Oops, sis. Looked like the bakery stock." My parents had merely chuckled, ruffling his hair. "Boys will be boys." Now it didn't seem like an accident. It felt like casual, entitled theft, enabled and excused. It all started to click into place, the disparate, confusing pieces forming a sickeningly clear mosaic. The help wasn't help. It was interference. It was control. It was systematic, calculated theft dressed up in the guise of familial support. The realization was a dull, throbbing ache in my chest. Grandma Eleanor watched my face, her expression a mixture of sorrow and grim resolve. "And it gets worse, Amara," she said softly, her voice pulling me back from the sickening reel of memories. "I suspect they've also been subtly, insidiously undermining Sweet Traditions itself. Worse. How could it be worse than stealing my seed money, the very money she had given me, that big potential order from the gourmet pantry in Oak Haven Village? Grandma continued, her gaze unwavering. "The one you were so excited about last spring, the one that mysteriously got canceled at the last minute with no clear explanation." I nodded, the memory still a fresh sting of disappointment. Mrs. Henderson, the owner of the Gourmet Pantry, a chic delicatessen that specialized in artisanal products, had been so enthusiastic about my samples. She'd spoken of a trial order of 5 dozen jars, a potential standing weekly order if they sold well. It would have been my biggest break. Then silence, followed by a curt email. "Circumstances have changed. We will not be proceeding at this time." No further explanation offered, no calls returned. "Your mother," Grandma said, her voice laced with a quiet disdain. I'd never heard from her before, had a casual chat with Mrs. Henderson a few days before the cancellation. Clara mentioned quite helpfully that while your preserves were lovely, your home kitchen wasn't quite up to commercial standards, yet for larger orders. She suggested Mrs. Henderson might be jumping the gun, putting too much pressure on your little home-based operation. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. Sabotage. Active, deliberate sabotage. My own mother. "And do you remember that food blogger?" Grandma pressed on, relentless. "Chelsea Chen, the one with the popular City Bites column, who was so keen to review your preserves after tasting your spiced plum at the winter market. She requested samples, you sent them, and then she ghosted you. No review, no communication." I nodded again, numbly. I'd assumed she'd just been too busy or perhaps hadn't liked them as much as she'd initially let on. It had been another blow to my fragile confidence. "Your father," Grandma stated, her eyes like chips of flint, "ran into Mr. Chen, Chelsea's husband, at the golf club. David told him, in that bluff, man-to-man way of his, that you were still perfecting your recipes, that you were a bit overwhelmed and not quite ready for that kind of major exposure. He implied you were an amateur, not a professional, ready for scrutiny." Twist upon twist. My mind reeled. They weren't just taking my money, the money Grandma had specifically earmarked for me for my dream. They were actively, methodically poisoning the wells of opportunity, ensuring sweet traditions remained small, insignificant, a hobby. They were clipping my wings to keep me grounded, dependent, perhaps to ensure their failing bakery, their precious Julian, remained the only viable Sage family food business in their deluded eyes. The betrayal was a physical ache, a cold dread spreading through my limbs, leaving me hollowed out. They hadn't just neglected my dreams, they had waged a quiet, insidious war against them. My voice, when I finally found it, trembled with a mixture of shock, grief, and a nascent, unfamiliar flicker of rage. "Why?" I whispered, looking at my grandmother, the one person who had always seemed to be in my corner. "Why would they do that to me, to their own daughter? And why would you let it go on if you knew? If you suspected?" Grandma Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her gaze softening slightly, but the steel remained. "I needed proof, Amara. Solid, irrefutable proof. Not just suspicions. Those letters," she gestured to the pile from creditors, "confirm the bakery's dire straits. The bank statements show the flow of funds. My sources confirm the conversations with Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Chen." She paused, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. "And more importantly, Amara, you needed to be ready to see it, truly see it, without excuses, without the filial piety that has kept you silent and accommodating for so long. And you needed to be ready to fight, not with hysterics, but with clarity and strength. Are you ready, Amara?" Her question hung in the air, heavy and profound. Ready, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. But amidst the swirling chaos of betrayal and hurt, something else was stirring. A cold, hard fury. A feeling I hadn't realized I was capable of. The years of being dismissed, of being a minor ingredient, of having my passion patronized as a little hobby, while my inheritance, for that's what Grandma's money felt like, an inheritance of belief, was siphoned away and my efforts sabotaged. It all coalesced into a single sharp point of resolve. Grandma Eleanor had opened my eyes. She had laid out the map of their deceit. Now it was up to me to navigate the treacherous terrain and perhaps to redraw the map entirely. The anger was a fire in my belly, a clean, purifying flame burning away years of accumulated self-doubt and weary resignation. Yes, I was ready. Ready to see, ready to understand, and ready to act. The taste of betrayal was bitter, but the prospect of truth, of justice, was beginning to taste surprisingly, intoxicatingly sweet. The days that followed were a blur of cold fury and meticulous action. Grandma had cracked open the door to the truth. I was now determined to kick it wide open and drag every shadowed secret into the glaring light. The anger, far from consuming me, sharpened my focus. It was a whetstone against which I honed my resolve. Years of being the sensible, organized marketing coordinator of managing data and tracking campaigns for consolidated paper goods had given me a skill set I now realized was invaluable. I was no stranger to digging through digital trails and piecing together narratives from scattered data points. My first target was the shared family cloud storage. Years ago, my mother, in another one of her helpful gestures, had insisted on backing up all my Sweet Traditions business files, recipes, supplier lists, early sales records, customer contacts. "Just in case your little computer crashes, dear," she'd said with that saccharine smile. "Can't be too careful with your precious work." At the time, I'd found it slightly overbearing, but ultimately benign. Now I saw it for what it was, another avenue of access, another point of control. I logged in, my fingers flying across the keyboard, a strange calmness settling over me. And there it was. Not just my files, but folders belonging to Sage and Sons Patisserie folders. Julian was probably too disorganized to manage himself, and Dad too technologically inept to navigate. Within hours, I found them altered invoices where larger supply orders for Sweet Traditions seemed to have been subtly inflated, the excess presumably rerouted. Emails between my parents, terse and anxious, discussing how to manage Amara's windfall and temporarily reallocate resources to cover the shortfall from the Henderson account. There were notes, too, in a document titled Bakery Urgent, detailing Julian's increasingly desperate requests for funds to cover unexpected equipment repairs or premium ingredient purchases that never seemed to materialize in the quality of their end products. Each discovery was a fresh stab, yet each piece of evidence also solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about money. It was about the systematic erosion of my efforts, the calculated undermining of my independence. The anger was no longer a diffuse heat. It was a focused beam burning away the last vestiges of my naive trust. The self-doubt that had plagued me for years, the quiet whispers that I wasn't good enough, that my dreams were foolish, they were being silenced by the roar of their duplicity. Armed with a folder of damning printouts, I decided the time for quiet investigation was over. It was time for a confrontation. I drove to my parents' house in Oakhaven, the familiar tree-lined streets now feeling alien a facade, for the ugliness I now knew lay within their carefully maintained home. They were in the kitchen, the heart of their home, the place where countless family meals had been shared, countless lies spun. Mom was arranging flowers, Dad was reading the paper, the picture of domestic tranquility. Julian was predictably absent. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I laid the folder on their gleaming granite countertop. "I know," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, devoid of the tremor I'd expected. "I know about the money. Grandma's money. I know how you've been reallocating it to the bakery." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, the flowers forgotten. David lowered his paper, his face paling. For a moment there was pure, unadulterated shock in their eyes. Then the masks snapped back into place. "Amara, darling, what on earth are you talking about?" Clara began, her voice trembling slightly, attempting a tone of bewildered innocence. "You're imagining things. We would never. Your grandmother's gift to you is your own business." David puffed himself up, adopting his usual blustering authoritative stance. "Now see here, Amara, this is a terrible misunderstanding. If there were any discrepancies, it was only ever with the best intentions. We were just helping the family business stay afloat during a tight spot. Your money was an investment in all of us in the Sage family legacy. The sheer audacity of it, the attempt to gaslight me to twist their theft into some noble act of familial preservation, stoked the fire in my belly. My money, I asked, my voice dangerously calm, each word carefully enunciated. Or Grandma Eleanor's money that was specifically explicitly intended for my business, Sweet Traditions. The business you've not only stolen from, but have also been actively, deliberately sabotaging. I saw it then. Not a flicker, but a full-blown inferno of guilt in their eyes. Panic. And most damningly, not a single solitary shred of remorse. Just fear of exposure. Their carefully constructed world was teetering. Clara began to cry, fat tears rolling down her cheeks. We just wanted to protect the bakery. It's been in the family for Julian. Protect it by destroying my chances. I countered, the steel in my voice unwavering. By lying to Mrs. Henderson, by telling Mr. Chen I was an amateur. David slammed his hand on the counter. Don't you take that tone with us, young lady. We are your parents. We've always done what's best for this family. What's best for Julian, you mean? I corrected, my heart aching, not with sadness anymore, but with a profound, weary disappointment. What's best for maintaining the illusion of Sage and Sons' success, no matter the cost to me. The confrontation ended with no resolution, only their blustering denials and tearful, self-serving justifications. I left their house feeling strangely lighter, as if a great weight had been shed. The truth was out between us, raw and ugly, but it was out. The era of polite pretenses was over. A few days later, a glossy flyer arrived in the mail, the 15th annual Taste of the Town Artisan Food Fair. It was Oak Haven's premier culinary event, a prestigious gathering of local chefs, bakers, and food producers. Sage and Sons Patisserie always had a prime booth, a large, expensive double spot near the entrance, a testament to their supposedly established status. I usually avoided the fair, the sight of their booth, Julian preening my parents, playing the proud patrons, a painful reminder of my own sidelined ambitions. That evening, my parents approached me. It was at another strained family dinner, this one at their house, an attempt on their part, I suspected, to feign normalcy after our explosive confrontation. Julian was present this time, unusually quiet, picking at his food, clearly having been given a heavily edited version of my accusations. David cleared his throat, a horribly fake, jovial smile plastered on his face. Amara, darling, great news. We've been thinking, and with the Taste of the Town coming up, he paused for dramatic effect. We've decided to give Sweet Traditions a little corner at our booth this year, a fantastic opportunity for you to get some exposure, under the established Sage and Sons banner. Clara chimed in. Her smile equally forced her eyes darting nervously towards me. Yes, show everyone what our talented family can do together. It'll be wonderful for you, dear. A real stepping stone. I stared at them, speechless for a moment. The audacity. It was breathtaking. After everything I'd uncovered, after the accusations, the proof I'd hinted at, they still saw me as nothing more than a pawn, a means to an end, a way to bolster their failing image, perhaps even a way to subtly legitimize their use of my funds by publicly including me. Maybe they even thought they could pressure me into contributing to the exorbitant booth rental fee. The irony was a cruel, bitter joke. They were unwittingly handing me the perfect stage for their downfall. The perfect public arena. A slow smile, a genuine one this time, spread across my face. A corner of your booth, I mused, tapping my chin thoughtfully. That's an interesting offer, Dad. Mom, I'll certainly give it some thought. Their relieved expressions were almost comical. They thought they still had me, still controlled the narrative. They had no idea. Later that night, I sat with Grandma Eleanor in her drawing room once more. The atmosphere was different this time. The air crackled not with tension, but with a shared, unspoken anticipation. I laid out their generous offer. They want me at their booth, Grandma, I said, a determined glint in my eye that mirrored one I often saw in hers. They want to use Sweet Traditions as a prop. I have an idea, a way to serve them exactly what they deserve. A dish best served publicly, perhaps. A faint knowing smile touched Grandma Eleanor's lips. It was the smile of a seasoned chess player who sees the checkmate several moves ahead. "I thought you might, Amara." She said, her voice smooth as velvet. Their arrogance truly knows no bounds, and I have a feeling Sweet Traditions by Amara might just need its own booth this year, a bigger one, perhaps right next to theirs. She paused, her eyes twinkling. "My treat, dear. Consider it. A new investment. An investment in unvarnished truth." My heart swelled. Grandma wasn't just my supporter, my benefactor. She was my co-conspirator, my ally in this unfolding drama. The plan, audacious and terrifying and exhilarating all at once, began to form clear and sharp in my mind. The taste of the town was no longer an event to be dreaded. It was the stage, and the curtain was about to rise. The day of the Taste of the Town Artisan Food Fair dawned bright and crisp, a perfect late spring Saturday. The Oak Haven Community Center grounds were already buzzing with energy by the time Maya, my best friend, and a fiercely loyal solicitor with a wit as sharp as her legal mind, and I arrived to set up. Food trucks were jockeying for position, vendors were unfurling banners, and the air was already thick with a tantalizing medley of grilling meats, baking bread, and brewing coffee. Grandma Eleanor, true to her word, had secured a premium double booth for Sweet Traditions by Amara, crafted with passion and integrity. And in a stroke of deliciously ironic genius, it was situated directly adjacent to the equally large but suddenly rather tired-looking booth of Sage and Sons Patisserie. Our booth was a vibrant explosion of color and charm. We draped it in warm rustic fabrics, burlap and checked linen in shades of cream and berry. Strings of tiny fairy lights twinkled amongst strategically placed baskets, overflowing with fresh fruits, glossy strawberries, plump figs, blushing peaches, reflecting the core ingredients of my preserves. My jars, dozens upon dozens of them, were arranged in artful pyramids, their jewel-toned contents gleaming under the spotlights Maya had ingeniously rigged. We had tasting stations with tiny spoons and artisanal crackers, beautiful hand-lettered signs detailing the unique flavor profiles, strawberry and balsamic with a hint of black pepper, spiced pear and ginger with star anise, fig and cardamom with a whisper of orange zest. I even had a small bubbling pot of my signature raspberry rose preserve, warming gently, its perfume wafting invitingly into the aisle. I dressed in a smart, cheerful apron over a crisp white shirt, and dark jeans felt a surge of nervous energy, but beneath it a bedrock of calm confidence. I looked over at Maya, who was meticulously arranging a display of my newly printed business cards and brochures. She caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up, her smile radiating encouragement. "You've got this, Amara," she mouthed. "Showtime." In stark contrast, the Sage and Sons Patisserie booth next door looked, well, sad. Their usual banner, once so grand, now seemed faded and a little frayed around the edges. The pastries on display, the familiar, uninspired selection of slightly lopsided croissants, bland-looking danishes, and those perpetually unsold Earl Grey eclairs, lacked vibrancy. Julian, looking harried and stressed in a stained chef's jacket, was snapping at a young, overwhelmed-looking temporary helper. My father, David, was attempting to drum up enthusiasm with a forced, booming joviality that wasn't fooling anyone, while my mother, Clara, hovered anxiously rearranging already perfectly arranged doilies with trembling hands. They kept shooting venomous, disbelieving glares in my direction, their faces tight with a mixture of fury and dawning panic. They clearly hadn't anticipated this. They'd expected me to be tucked away in a shadowed corner of their space, a minor footnote to their supposed glory. Not this. This declaration of independence, this vibrant, confident assertion of my own brand literally overshadowing theirs. Game on. From the moment the fair officially opened, our Sweet Traditions booth was swamped. People were drawn in by the beautiful display, the enticing aromas, and I hoped by the genuine passion I felt as I talked about my ingredients, my process, my small batch philosophy. Maya, a natural salesperson with her easy charm, worked the crowd, handing out samples, collecting email addresses for my newsletter, and effortlessly upselling customers from single jars to gift baskets. The oohs and ahs as people tasted my preserves were music to my ears. This fig and cardamom is divine. I've never tasted anything like this spiced peach. Your raspberry rose is like summer in a jar. Orders piled up. Money changed hands. My little dream was quite literally flying off the shelves. Meanwhile, the foot traffic at the Sage & Sons booth was sparse. A few loyal older customers stopped by out of habit, but most people drawn by the buzz. And the quality at my booth gave theirs a cursory glance and moved on. David's forced smiles grew more strained. Clara's fluttering became more frantic, and Julian just looked bewildered and increasingly sullen, like a child whose favorite toy had been taken away. The contrast was stark public and deeply, deeply satisfying. It wasn't just about the sales, it was about the validation. For years, I had been the invisible one my talents dismissed. Today, I was seen. My creations were celebrated. Around mid-afternoon, as the fair reached its peak attendance, a small commotion rippled through our section. Chelsea Chen, the influential food blogger behind the hugely popular City Bites column and social media channels, was making her way down the aisle, a microphone in hand, a cameraman trailing her. My heart gave a little lurch. This was it. She stopped first at my booth, her eyes bright and intelligent, taking in the display, the happy customers, the growing pile of sold-out signs on certain flavors. She'd already tasted a sample of my blushing apricot and lavender from Maya. "Amara Sage," she exclaimed. Her voice amplified slightly by the microphone, drawing even more attention. "Your preserves are absolutely the talk of the fair today. The buzz is incredible. Tell me this is such a stunning debut for Sweet Traditions. How does your venture fit in with the renowned Sage & Sons Patisserie right next door? A family collaboration, perhaps?" Out of the corner of my eye, I saw David and Clara practically sprint from their booth, their faces a mixture of desperation and feigned bonhomie. They clearly intended to hijack the interview to spin their narrative. "She's our rising star," David boomed, trying to position himself beside me, his arms snaking out as if to put it around my shoulder. "Learning from the family masters. We're so proud to have mentored her." Clara nodded vigorously, adding, "Yes, it's wonderful to see the younger generation taking an interest in the family traditions." I sidestepped David's arm smoothly, a small, polite smile on my face, and stepped forward, taking the microphone Chelsea subtly offered me. My moment, my narrative. "Actually, Chelsea," I said, my voice calm, clear, and carrying easily in the sudden hush that had fallen over the immediate vicinity. I looked directly at my parents, then at Julian, who had slunk to the back of their booth, trying to appear invisible. "While I appreciate my family's interest, Sweet Traditions by Amara is entirely my own independent venture. Built from scratch with my own recipes, my own funding, and my own hard work." I paused, letting that sink in, then turned slightly to address Chelsea and the wider audience more directly. Unlike some establishments, I continued my gaze flicking meaningfully towards the Sage & Sons sign. "We at Sweet Traditions believe in complete transparency, ethical sourcing of all our ingredients, and frankly developing truly original recipes that don't involve, let's say, siphoning funds from other sources or actively sabotaging fellow artisans to stay afloat." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. David's face went from ruddy to a ghastly mottled purple. Clara looked like she might faint. Julian literally shrank his shoulders, hunching as if to ward off a physical blow. Chelsea Chen's eyes widened, her journalistic instincts clearly on high alert. She smelled a story, a big one. "That's quite a statement, Amara," Chelsea said, her voice betraying a hint of excitement. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting," I interrupted gently but firmly, "that integrity is the most important ingredient in any recipe, whether it's a jar of jam or a business model. Sweet Traditions is profitable. It's honest, and it's growing organically based on the quality of its products and the trust of its customers." I allowed myself a small, pointed gesture towards my parents, who stood frozen mouths agape. "We don't rely on illusions, misdirection, or the gross mismanagement of investments specifically and generously given by benefactors for one purpose only to be secretly diverted to another. My voice carried clear and ringing. For example, funds given by my grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, expressly to support my fledgling business to help me buy ingredients and equipment. As if on cue, and knowing Grandma, it probably was on cue, a figure of regal elegance appeared at the edge of the crowd. Grandma Eleanor dressed in a chic lavender suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her expression serene, but with an unmistakable glint of triumph in her eyes, glided towards my booth. The crowd parted respectfully for her. She stopped beside me, placing a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. Her voice, though not loud, resonated with authority and a distinct chill when she glanced towards my parents. And it was an investment exceptionally well placed, she declared, her gaze sweeping over the impressed faces in the crowd, then landing with laser focus on my stunned parents and brother. Amara, your booth is magnificent. Your preserves are exquisite. I am immensely proud to see Sweet Traditions thriving so spectacularly on its own undeniable merit. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. It's remarkably refreshing to witness a business built on genuine talent, innovation, and hard, honest work, not on smoke mirrors and a legacy of mismanagement. She didn't need to elaborate. Her pointed, lingering look at the now deserted Sage and Sons Patisserie booth, at the humiliated, ashen faces of my parents and brother, said everything. The crowd murmured a low hum of shocked understanding and dawning condemnation. Chelsea Chen was scribbling furiously in her notepad, her cameraman capturing every mortifying second. David looked like he'd been poleaxed. Clara swayed, and I thought for a moment she might actually collapse. Julian just stared at the ground, his face burning with a shame I almost pitied. Checkmate. Their precious, carefully curated reputation, built on a foundation of lies propped up by deceit, and my stolen dreams had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes in the most public way imaginable. The taste of that victory, it was complex, sharp, a little bitter from the years of hurt, but overwhelmingly, undeniably, infinitely sweeter than any preserve I had ever made. It was the taste of truth served cold, and it was delicious. The fallout from the Taste of the Town artisan food fair was immediate and spectacular. Chelsea Chen's blog post titled "Bitter Feud or Sweet Justice," the Sage family saga uncorked at Oakhaven Food Fair, went viral within hours. It was a masterpiece of journalistic insinuation, quoting my carefully chosen words, Grandma Eleanor's damning endorsement, and contrasting it with the visibly distressed and notably silent members of the elder Sage culinary dynasty. She painted Sweet Traditions by Amara as the plucky, ethical underdog triumphing over an established but clearly troubled institution. Other local news outlets picked up the story, intrigued by the whiff of family drama and financial impropriety. The narrative was set, Amara Sage, the wrong daughter, finally claiming her rightful place in the culinary world, while Sage and Sons Patisserie faced a public reckoning. Within a week, a small, unceremonious, temporarily closed sign appeared in the window of Sage and Sons. It soon became closed for renovations, then finally just closed. The weight of their debts, coupled with the sudden harsh glare of public scandal and the evaporation of their remaining credit lines, was too much to bear. My parents lost their status symbol, their primary source of borrowed pride, the glittering bauble they had polished for so long while neglecting the real gems within their own family. The illusion had shattered, and reality stark and unforgiving had moved in. For me, it was the beginning of everything. The Monday after the fair, I walked into the beige labyrinth of Consolidated Paper Goods, Inc., handed in my resignation with a smile that felt genuinely liberating, and walked out into the sunshine feeling lighter than I had in years. The marketing coordinator role, once my sensible anchor, now felt like a discarded skin. Sweet Traditions by Amara exploded. The story, the quality of the preserves, the underlying narrative of integrity and passion, it all resonated with people. Orders poured in, not just from individuals, but from gourmet shops, cafes, even a few high-end restaurants looking for unique local products. Mrs. Henderson from the gourmet pantry called personally, profusely apologetic, explaining she'd been terribly misled. She placed a standing order for 24 jars of my fig and cardamom and strawberry and balsamic each week. My tiny dream, once bubbling away on the back burner, was now a roaring, beautiful fire. I leased a small commercial kitchen space in a shared culinary incubator in the revitalized warehouse district, a place humming with the creative energy of other food entrepreneurs. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. It had gleaming stainless steel countertops, a commercial-grade stove, and yes, finally that beautiful, powerful stand mixer I'd dreamed of. Maya, when she wasn't in court, would often come by in the evenings, ostensibly to help pack orders, but mostly, I think, to soak in the atmosphere of burgeoning success and to ensure I was actually eating something other than preserved samples. "You know," she said one evening, expertly tying a ribbon around a gift basket, "for a revenge plot, this one has remarkably delicious consequences." I laughed a genuine easy laugh. "It wasn't just about revenge, Maya. Not entirely. It was about reclaiming something." "Yourself," she said, nodding, "and it looks good on you." My mother called once about a month after the fair. Her voice was strained thin, stripped of its usual forced cheerfulness. "Amara, we're your family. You didn't have to humiliate us like that, in front of everyone." The old Amara might have felt a pang of guilt, a flicker of the ingrained obligation to smooth things over. But the new Amara, the one forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the sweet taste of self-won success, stood firm. "Mom," I said, my voice calm but not unkind, "you Dad and Julian humiliated yourselves with your choices, with your actions over years. I just chose, finally, not to be a part of the lie anymore. My door is always open if you ever want to have a truly honest conversation, a real one, without the blame and the manipulation. But the deceit, Mom, that stops now. For everyone's sake." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then a quiet click. It wasn't a hostile ending, but it was an ending nonetheless, an ending to the old toxic dynamic. The path to any future reconciliation would have to be paved with honesty, and that was a currency they hadn't yet seemed willing to trade in. I had tea with Grandma Eleanor often in those early months of my new life. Her drawing room, once the setting for shocking revelations, now felt like a haven of quiet celebration. "I knew you had it in you, Amara," she said one afternoon, sipping her lapsang souchong. The talent was always there, simmering beneath the surface. Sometimes the people who are supposed to lift us up are the very ones holding us down, tethering us with their own fears and failings. You needed to find your own wings, dear girl. "You knew, didn't you, Grandma?" I asked, looking at her over the rim of my teacup. "All along, about the state of the bakery, about their schemes with your money." She smiled that enigmatic Mona Lisa smile. "Let's just say I've seen a few things in my 78 years. I pay attention. I invested in your potential, Amara, that was always true. The $1,500 was merely the key, the catalyst. But you, my dear, had to be the one to turn it in the lock, to push open the door and have the courage to step through. And I finally understood. Grandma Eleanor hadn't just given me money. She'd given me a meticulously orchestrated opportunity to reclaim myself, to discover a strength I hadn't known I possessed. She'd laid the chessboard knowing I had the intellect and, when pushed, the ruthlessness to play the game to its conclusion. Even Julian, stripped of the family's delusions and the unearned mantle of prodigy, began slowly to find his own way. The last I heard, through the Oak Haven grapevine, he was working as a prep cook in a busy, unglamorous, but well-respected Italian restaurant downtown. Starting from the bottom, learning the ropes, actually working for his place. I saw him once from a distance through the restaurant window. He was diligently chopping vegetables, his brow furrowed in concentration. He briefly made eye contact with the bustling head chef, nodded respectfully, and got back to his task. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for him to build something real, something of his own from the ground up, without the suffocating weight of false expectations and familial deceit. As for me, my life is no longer a recipe written by someone else, dictated by the bland tastes and limited imaginations of others. It's mine. It's messy at times, challenging, exhausting even, but it's gloriously, authentically mine. I wake up every day excited to go to my kitchen to create, to build. Sweet Traditions by Amara is thriving, a testament not to revenge, but to resilience, to the quiet power of integrity, and to the courage it takes to claim your own story. And the taste of that life, it's incredibly, intoxicatingly sweet. Each jar I fill, each label I write, is a reminder I am no longer a minor ingredient. I am the chef, the author, the creator of my own delicious destiny. My journey was a labyrinth, winding through corridors of familial expectation, shadowed corners of quiet dismissal, and the stark, brightly lit arena of public confrontation. It began with the feeling of being an afterthought, a pale flavor in a dish dominated by others, and culminated in a reckoning that was as much about self-liberation as it was about exposing a painful truth. The satisfaction of seeing the scales balance was undeniable, a sharp, clean note in a complex symphony. But the real victory wasn't just in their downfall, but in my ascent. It was about reclaiming my worth, unearthing dreams I'd allowed to be buried, and finding a voice that had been muted for far too long by a dynamic designed to keep me small, manageable, and perpetually in the shadow of a fabricated family success. The most profound lesson in all of this, the one that resonates long after the drama has faded, is the vital importance of trusting your own instincts. That quiet disquiet, that nagging feeling that something is fundamentally misaligned, it's rarely wrong. It's the soul's early warning system. For years, I had dismissed my own intuition, papering over the cracks in my family's facade with excuses and misplaced loyalty. Don't let anyone, not even those bound to you by blood or history, diminish your light, exploit your kindness, or rewrite your narrative to suit their own. Sometimes the most profoundly loving act, for yourself and paradoxically even for them in the long, arduous arc of growth, is to draw an unshakable line in the sand. To demand integrity not just from others, but from yourself in how you choose to live and be seen. It took a single, seemingly innocuous question at a family dinner, a question planted like a seed by a wise, perceptive grandmother, to begin the unraveling of years of carefully constructed deception. But that unraveling, as painful and shocking as it was, led me to a path that is genuinely, authentically my own. It led me to a life filled with the rich, vibrant flavors of passion pursued and potential realized. And that, I've discovered, is a truth not just worth fighting for, but worth savoring every single day. The sweetness of authenticity once tasted is a flavor you never forget, a nourishment for the soul that sustains long after the bitter tang of old wounds has faded. My life, like my preserves, is now crafted with passion and integrity, and its taste is finally perfectly my own.